Good afternoon, and thank you for joining Miami Cancer Institute's 4th Virtual Inspire You program, 59 Seconds to Live, Miracle on the Hudson. We encourage you to use the chat and Q&A functions to submit any questions or comments throughout the program. We will be having a Q&A session with our guest speaker after the presentation. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Michael Sinner, CEO and Executive Medical Director for Miami Cancer Institute. Dr. Sinner.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Mike Zinner. I'm the CEO and Executive Medical Director of Miami Cancer Institute. We're part of Baptist Health South Florida, which is the largest healthcare service in our region. In addition to that, the Cancer Institute is now the 3rd largest cancer institute in the state of Florida. I'm pleased to help introduce our 4th virtual Inspire You program. Now, these programs were designed for patients, caregivers, and community members as platforms for inspirational and motivational guests to inspire you, particularly the patients with cancer. And today, we are honored to have Billy Campbell as our guest. Billy is a survivor of U.S. Airways Flight 1549. We all remember that. That was the one that took off from New York's LaGuardia Airport and was forced to land on the Hudson after striking a flock of geese. A true survivor, Billy is also an accomplished professional and served as the Chief Executive Officer of Forbes Travel Guide, was president of Discovery Networks, where he led the management of network channels including Discovery, TLC, Animal Planet, Travel, Health, in addition to 8 digital channels. With a magnetic career in television and entertainment, Billy has led major entertainment networks, including Miramax Television, CBS Entertainment, and Warner Brothers Television, as well as assisted in the development of groundbreaking television programs and specials, including some of the ones I love, like Everyone Loves Raymond, The King of Queens, ER, Lois and Clark, MacGyver, and Dynasty, among countless others. So at this time, I invite you to join me in welcoming Billy Campbell as he narrates his miraculous experience of survival in 59 Seconds to Live, Miracle on the Hudson. Billy?
Dr. Zinner, thank you for that wonderful introduction. And more importantly, thank you and your entire team for all that you're doing to help patients and families every day in the battle with cancer. What you've accomplished in these past 5.5 years is really remarkable. Today, the Miami Cancer Institute has seen over 1,000 patients per day and offers nearly 200 clinical trials for your patients. You just told me that you now have 114 doctors. Extraordinary. I still remember visiting your campus several years ago as you opened to the public, and I felt the warmth of the MCI family as I walked through the building. As I speak to all of you today, I'll be touching on the possibility of miracles in our lives. Without question, what you're doing at the Miami Cancer Institute is truly miraculous. Nearly 3 years ago, I had the privilege of being either your first or second speaker for the Inspire You series. I had met Peg Harston on a flight from Miami to the Carolinas, and we had a lovely chat. But be careful who you sit next to on an airplane. You never know what they might ask you to do. Peg and Patty, thank you for inviting me to speak again to this special family. I think most of you watching today are either cancer patients, loved ones supporting these patients, or doctors and healthcare workers who give everything every day to fight this awful disease. Sometimes you must wonder if you're making a real difference. A quick story might illuminate this for you. When I moved to Miami several years ago, I knew very few people. Fortunately, I knew Brian and Ricky Elias, who were very special friends. Their family is quite something. And I pretty much refer to them as the first family of Miami. Their father, Dr. Richard Elias, is 90 years old and has 4 other siblings who are alive and thriving. And guess what? They're all over the age of 89. I invited Dr. Elias to my first talk 3 years ago, and he was kind enough to attend. He had just retired after 65 years as a cardiologist and internal medicine expert. I mentioned him during my talk, and what knocked me off my feet was at least 30 people in the audience came up to him after the speech. Seemingly everyone knew him. But most importantly, what they all said to him was, Dr. Elias, you helped save and or change my life. I just wanted you to know and to say thank you. So to each of you that give so much of yourselves to help each patient, it makes an enormous difference, and you are changing your patients' lives for the better. To the patients, doctors, and healthcare team, I salute you. Since both of my college roommates are top surgeons, I badger them weekly on the progress being made in the medical world. Look at the superhuman advancements made in the past year in battling the horror of COVID. By the summer, experts believe we'll have enough vaccinations for our entire population. Together, we need to encourage everyone to take them. Here are a few other things that have me excited. The pace of cancer research and advanced treatment is the fastest it's ever been, and it's really only beginning to accelerate. Many cancers today are completely curable, and none are totally terminal, which is a huge shift from just 5 years ago. MCI is a leader in the use of immunotherapy, which targets the body's own immune system to fight cancer. The promise is so great, and it's awesome to see this leadership at home in Miami. I know that today's theme is supposed to be inspire, but I'd like to focus on hope. What is hope? It's the feeling that what you want can occur, or that events will turn out for the best. That can't happen if you don't believe. The statistics on the power of positive thinking are extraordinary. Attitude won't cure everything, but it sure goes a long way to help. So today I'd like you to focus on 4 words: hope, science, love, and faith. The Miami Cancer Institute will supply 2 if you'll meet them halfway. They'll match their powerful science with tons of love. And you and your families just have to supply a strong dose of hope and a pinch of faith. I'm now going to share a story with you, which will demonstrate why I believe these traits can change your life. And when you add them all together, I truly believe they help bring about miracles. This story is mine and based on my faith in God. As you hear this story, I hope that you'll think about your life, dealing with the unexpected, the nature of miracles, and mostly about God's love. For the next few minutes, I'd like you to forget that you're sitting in front of your computer screen and join me on flight 1549, leaving New York's LaGuardia Airport and bound for Charlotte, North Carolina. I was flying home to meet my family along the South Carolina coast for a long weekend and to spend a little time with my 7 and 9-year-old nephews. I was in New York City for several meetings, and before going to bed, I remember hearing the weatherman say that tomorrow is going to be the coldest day of the year with possible blizzard conditions. All morning in the city, the wind and the snow were swirling. But just before I got into the car to head to LaGuardia, things cleared up. As I arrived at the departure area, I thought this was going to be a great day for flying. Clear skies and cold air, perfect for the jet engines. And I shouldn't have any problem making my connection in Charlotte to arrive in South Carolina at the beach in time for my favorite Bojangles combo of sweet iced tea and fried chicken dinner. How could life get any better? I boarded and took my window seat in the rear of the plane on the left-hand side. Normally, I prefer the aisle, but this would be a short flight to Charlotte. And since the weather had cleared, I would have a fantastic view of the Manhattan skyline. As we began our ascent away from LaGuardia, I admired New York's beauty and settled into reading the newspaper. After reaching about 2,800 feet and a little over 100 seconds into the flight, bam! An explosion occurred. The plane shuddered and dramatically slowed. As I looked out of my window, the image most vivid was the left engine completely engulfed in flames. No sparks or tiny fire. Instead, a bonfire of flames leaping from the wing. My engine was burning. Welcome to US Airways Flight 1549, and now you are in seat 25A in the back of the plane. We continue to climb for about another 400 feet. and there's a strong smell of jet fuel throughout the plane. I'm not entirely sure that we don't have a fire inside. The flight attendant in the rear of the plane tells us to remain calm and that everything's fine. I can't see what's happening on the right side of the plane, but clearly everything is not fine. As we reach an altitude of nearly 3,300 feet, the plane banks very slowly to the left, and we seem to be headed back to the airport. I remember thinking, I'm not sure I'll make my original connection, but I should get to the beach in time for that chicken dinner. I can see the runway from my window as we head back toward LaGuardia, but then we stop turning, and I realize that we're heading down the Hudson River. We are slowly descending and decelerating, but in a controlled manner. As we pass over the spans of the George Washington Bridge, I realize that the captain is protecting himself. Clearly, we're not heading back to LaGuardia, so he must be trying to get to another airport to land. The fire from my engine continues to burn out of control, and it's clear we have very little power. But I'm not sure about the engine on the right side and assume we have some power because we're still flying. As we continue to descend, my mind begins to play tricks on me. We must be heading to Newark Airport since it's further downriver. But at our altitude, I'm not quite sure we can make it. And then I remember that as a young boy, I had once visited Ellis Island near the Statue of Liberty. And while I don't remember a landing strip on this tiny landmark, maybe they've added one that I just don't know about. To this point, the pilot has said nothing, and the only sounds on the plane are a few occasional gasps and cries among the passengers. As we continue to descend down the river, our pilot, Captain Sully Sullenberger, finally comes on the loudspeaker and says the words you never imagine you'll hear. Brace for impact. Now I'd like to ask you to do something that might be a bit uncomfortable. But since you're sitting in seat 25A, pretend that you have just been told that in 59 seconds, you'll be crashing into the Hudson River. And based on aviation history, it's probably your last minute on Earth. I'll let you ponder your own life for just a few seconds. It's awkward, isn't it? Those 59 seconds, for me, were most amazing. As an athlete and a huge sports fan, I immediately thought, 20-second timeout. This must be some kind of dream. The pilot couldn't have just said those words because brace for impact really meant prepare to die. Three things happened in those 59 seconds that will stay with me forever. The first was that God and I had a most wonderful conversation. Actually, it was mostly me talking while he listened. I remember thinking, I've had the most extraordinary 49 years and how grateful I was to him for the many incredible experiences he had given me. And I knew that if he needed me, I was ready and that my life was truly in his hands. Candidly, I must admit that I did say, God, if you're asking me, I'd love another 49 years. But that decision didn't seem to be in my control. The next thing that happened was shocking. I had heard stories of similar experiences, but suddenly many of the most beautiful and exquisite memories of my life played in my mind as though I were watching them on the big screen. Images of my mom and dad, my sister and little nephews, lifelong friendships, winning the football state championship in high school, and I think kissing a few pretty girls along the way. To me, it was worthy of an Academy Award. And for the final 20 seconds, my survival instinct kicked in and I realized I'm sitting in the back of the plane on the window and it's a long way to the exits on the wings. My only shot is to get to the door in the back galley. I reached under my seat, but couldn't get my life preserver to budge, and then decided I wanted to know exactly when the impact with the river would occur. The flight attendant was yelling, brace, brace, head down, head down. As I looked out of the window and the water came closer and closer, I just didn't understand how having my head between my legs was going to work out positively. It was clear that either I was going into the seat in front of me or it was coming back into my space. I chose to crouch down with a hand on my seatbelt and my eyes on the water so that upon impact, I could relax my body as much as possible. One of the lighter moments occurred as we were about 300 feet above the river and passed a boat on the left. There was a man on the deck, and I couldn't help but wondering, what in the world is he thinking as a jumbo jet passes him at eye level and is about to crash into the Hudson River? I still remember hearing some of the passengers crying. Some were praying aloud, and a few were eerily saying, "I can't swim, I can't swim." As we hit the river, I exhaled and held on tight. One of the things that saved my life was the genius of Captain Sullenberger and his ability to maintain the proper airspeed as we descended. Too slow and we stall and fall from the sky, and too fast, we have no chance upon impact. At about 200 feet above the river, he lifted the plane's nose, and we made a rear belly landing, which knocked a hole in the bottom of the plane near me and detached the seal from my window. As I looked out of the window, all I could see was dirty water. I wasn't sure how deep we were, but we popped up, slid along the water, and dipped again, and then began severely tilting to the right. As it turned out, the impact had knocked the left engine off of the plane, so all of our weight was on the right side. All I could think was that we were going to clip our right wing and be catapulted into a million pieces, or have the plane turn upside down. Neither option seemed very good. Stunningly, the wing did clip the water, but instead of turning over, it allowed us to fishtail and come to a stop with the nose facing Manhattan. I couldn't believe that I had survived the crash, but within seconds, the water was rushing through my window and up through the floor bottom. 4 or 5 of us quickly headed to the back, but with the water rising rapidly, we couldn't get the rear door open and were forced to turn around and look to the front. This might have been the most frightening moment, because as I looked forward, there was no way out. The aisle was jammed with people trying to exit, and the 35-degree water had risen from my ankles to about my neck within a minute. No matter what, I really didn't want to drown. My only shot was to try to climb over the seats, and I started on the right side against the windows of the last row. Normally, I would have been hurdling each row, but with the water up to here, I couldn't get any traction and had to pull myself over each seat and fall back into the water, only to repeat the process until I reached the wing and the open exit. I was so excited to think that maybe I was going to make it out, but a woman and her young child were lodged in the window exit, trying to get onto the wing. After helping them, I moved across the aisle and finally saw a clearing through that exit. Unfortunately, there was no room on that wing, so I either had to knock someone off or jump in the water. Instead, I climbed over a few more seats and then heard the pilots yell that I could come out of the front left exit and jump down into the raft. That was the first time I truly thought I was going to make it out in one piece. Within seconds, the co-pilot and Captain Sullenberger jumped down next to me, and I leaned over and grabbed Sully's arm and said, "Thank you. You saved all of our lives." He smiled and just said, "You're welcome." I remember asking co-pilots Jeff Skiles what had happened and what did he actually think when he knew we were ditching in the Hudson. He told me about hitting the flock of geese and then paused and said, "I thought the outcome would have been much, much worse." I sat shivering in the raft for about 15 minutes before we were rescued by a ferry and taken to the ferry terminal for several hours of waiting and medical attention. The next morning, I appeared on the Today Show and then flew home to the beach. And after hugging my mom, I got to stop at Bojangles for my favorite chicken and biscuit. So my question for you, do you believe in miracles? One of my agnostic friends said, "It's just a string of coincidences, Billy." And I remember telling him, well, how many coincidences constitute a miracle? Is it 3, 5, 10? I'm not sure how many miracles occurred that day, but in my heart, I know there were at least 12. Interesting number, isn't it? Think about how many things had to go right for me to be here today. The water temperature that day was 35 degrees. The next day, there were chunks of ice on the river with no chance of landing. There had never been a successful water ditching in which everyone survived. The crash happened at 3:30 in the afternoon. 2 hours later, it would have been completely dark, and Sully's depth perception would have been impaired. Plus, inside the plane, we would have been in complete darkness trying to get out. At that moment, there was very little traffic on that part of the Hudson River. The usual barge traffic would have made landing almost impossible. After blizzard conditions all morning, suddenly the storm had cleared out and the water was as smooth as glass. Instead of the plane breaking up into pieces, it floated for 24 minutes before sinking. Water was rushing into the cabin in the rear, and yet it stopped right here, just as I thought I would run out of air. The rush hour ferries were all operating with maximum crew availability. Sitting in the raft for much longer in the 16-degree weather would have been disastrous. We happened to be in New York City, which is prepared for almost any emergency. Our extraordinary crew had 3 brave and experienced flight attendants, all over the age of 50. The plane's wings were completely full of jet fuel, which allowed for maximum buoyancy. Normally, in an emergency, the pilot dumps as much fuel as possible. He didn't have time. And finally, my pilot was extraordinary. 57, a fighter pilot, calm and confident. Most importantly, a glider pilot with over 19,000 hours. He made all the right decisions. Everyone always asks, so was I going to die? It didn't look so good, but I felt that if God wanted me or needed me, I was ready. In the end, he clearly wasn't ready for me. Psalm 23 was quite comforting. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. I said to God, if you've decided that this is my time, I'm ready. It was peaceful and tranquil. God may take me tomorrow. If I have a say, he'll give me another 49 years, but that's not my call. Every day is a gift. There are no promises for tomorrow. With certainty, we only have today. And every day is a miracle. Some days are just bigger than normal. On Thursday, January 15th, 2009, God's grace brought about many, many miracles. What do you believe? I could spend the rest of my life wondering about why I was on flight 1549 that day at that hour. Why were those geese flying at that altitude at that second? But I've learned to accept them and move on. As Coach Mike Krzyzewski at Duke University tells his basketball players, forget the last shot. You can't change it. Focus on the next play. Accept those things that are out of your control and do not let them dictate the way that you move forward. Sometimes disaster comes out of nowhere with absolutely no warning. How you handle times like this is what will lead to success. When you're hit with the unimaginable, you have 3 choices. You can let it define you, you can let it destroy you, or you can let it strengthen you. And remember, sometimes you can't affect the wind, but you can always adjust your sails. We never know where life's twists and turns will lead us. So celebrate the wonder of being alive today. And think about this question when you go to bed tonight. If you were arrested tomorrow for being a good person, would they have enough evidence to convict you? I hope that in my remaining time on earth, I can build a mountain of evidence. One day, your life will flash before your eyes, so make it worth watching. To all of you that either have cancer in your body, in your family, or in your patient, remember that impossible is just an opinion. Thank you for sharing my story, and may God bless you each and every day.
Billy, that's just a remarkable story. Although I've heard the story before, every time you tell it, I get just as emotional as I do from the first time you told it. We are thrilled that you were able to share it with us today, and thank you for doing that. We have a number of questions, and I wonder if you'd be willing to answer some of them.
I would love to.
Many of them are around a same theme, and that is, how did this event affect your life and change anything that you do or did?
I think it's a great question and a fair question. And, you know, to give you a slight preface on that, when this happened, after it was over, I really didn't want to talk about it. It was so startling and obviously throws you into lots of different thinking patterns about your life and the people you care about. But because I'd been in the entertainment business and had asked for a lot of favors from other people, I decided to go do the talk on NBC. And I think what happened was that so many people were touched by the story, partly because we all have fears when there's turbulence on an airplane, or we've all, as you said earlier, flown out of LaGuardia Airport. So we all can share that experience. And who hasn't wondered about, you know, if things don't work out the way that they're supposed to, what comes next? But I think for me, I decided to give this talk and love giving it to people like you and Peg and your hospital and your patients, because you're all doing such magical and amazing things. And if there's a way to try to inspire you, which is what such a wonderful moniker for your program, then I'm happy to help. To specifically answer that question, it's not as complicated as it seems. I'd say the thing that I've probably taken from it more than any is just as I said in the talk, a better appreciation for today, for this moment, and to do the very best that you can every single day, because there's no guarantees. I think, not sweat the small stuff quite as much. So that's another kind of good message for everyone. Be a duck. Let a lot of stuff roll off your back that normally it might not. But to me, it's life's not that much different. I just feel like every day is a bonus day.
Well, that's actually an answer to many of the other questions. But how does it change your relationship with others? How does it affect your life experience? And the duck metaphor is actually quite appropriate for this. One other question. There are several questions, but another question is, after this experience, how did you have the courage to get back on a plane again and fly again?
So that leads to a funny story. So you're a little omniscient on that, because I wanted to get home as quickly as I could, obviously, to see my family. I think because of my faith that you heard me talk about in the talk, I never had any question about flying again. As a matter of fact, I flew the same flight that next afternoon. They changed the flight number, as you can imagine, but it was the same flight. Now, the funny part was, as I was getting on the plane, I looked into the cockpit, and the pilots knew that I was a passenger on the plane. And so they looked at me and I said, I want to make sure of something. Have you guys checked for geese? And so they kind of smiled and laughed and said, you're all clear today. And it was a clear day. They put me in first class. I was sitting against the window, and probably about midway through the flight, I was chatting with an elderly gentleman who was sitting next to me. We had just started talking, and the flight attendant leaned in and said, Mr. Campbell, I just want to check, are you okay? No, I hadn't spoken to her. I hadn't asked for something to drink or anything. So it was a little bit strange. And so I said, yes, ma'am, thank you for thinking about me. I'm fine. And so naturally, the passenger sitting next to me that I was talking to goes, well, that's pretty bizarre. Well, why did she do that? And I said, oh, she was just being thoughtful after what happened yesterday. So he said, well, what happened yesterday? And I said, well, yeah, I was on that flight. And he goes, well, what flight? He still hadn't gotten onto it. And I said, well, I was on the flight that crashed into the Hudson River. So all of a sudden he paused and he goes, oh my goodness. And then he kind of stops and he looks at me and he gets this huge smile on his face. And he goes, "This is going to be the greatest flight I've ever had. There's no way that you're going to crash twice in a row." So for me, but I have been I have one of my best friends growing up as a pilot, actually an aerobatic pilot out in California. I used to fly with him when I lived out there, just loved it. So I've always loved to fly. And as you know, you're a statistician in your own way with all of the data that you see. There's quite frankly no better way to get anywhere and safer way than to fly. It just so happened that day and that time there were Canadian geese that were in our way. But again, I had an incredible pilot who saved my life.
You know, that sort of brings us to another question that's come up, which is, have you remained in contact with either the other survivors or the crew from that flight? So
the answer is yes. I'm not in daily contact, but we've had a sort of a Yahoo chat room for these past 11 or so years. We did have the plane is in a museum in Charlotte, near the Charlotte airport. And so about 2 years ago, for the 10th anniversary, my sister and my nephews live in Charlotte. So I went down they had a wonderful reunion at the hangar. And so we got to see the plane and see each other and talk to Sully. And so the answer is yes, we do. Some of us stay in touch. Interestingly, I made a talk with Sullenberger. We were both on the same stage in Chicago about 5 years ago. And it was really a powerful moment, because how often, you may actually have this, because you and your colleagues get to save people's lives every day. But I was able to thank someone directly for saving my life, and he teared up on stage. It was a very moving time.
So it's interesting when you talk about physicians being able to be involved in other people's lives. At the moment, you never think about that. It's afterwards where you have the opportunity to look back on the experience and cherish the moments that you did have together. And so I do understand what you're saying.
Well, you guys are so well trained that you're just fixated on doing the procedure and doing it perfectly. But it's unbelievable, the reverberation that you have. It's like that stone in the pond, because when you save that patient or help that patient, that probably touches hundreds of people. So anyway, thank you for what you do. Well,
you're very gracious to say that, but this story is about you and your inspiration to us. So as we're waiting for another question to come in, I have to just make a comment. So you and I have a colleague in common. It's a fellow by the name of Dr. Mehmet Oz. And I told him that I would be on an interview with you today. And he said, "Oh yes, that's my college roommate. He's a superb athlete. He's a wonderful basketball player. In fact, he's such a good basketball player that the only way I could ever get him to get a shot blocked from him is if I intentionally hit him every time he was about to shoot and fouled him." Now, is that a true story? Is that a true story?
Well, the part about Dr. Mehmet Oz is 100% true, because he would hack me on almost every single play. But we had such a fun friendship in college, and we went to Harvard. And one of the fun parts of Harvard, you spent a lot of time in Boston, is that Harvard's dorms are so old, good and bad, but underneath the dorms, our dorm for our sophomore through senior year, were squash courts. And so after we'd study, every single night, Mehmet and I would go down through these sort of corridors and play squash at 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock at night. So we had a blast. He was also, he's humble, but he's a very good athlete too. He came to Harvard as a football player and then ended up being a goalie in water polo, which he had never played before. So the three of us, our other roommate, I don't want to give him short shrift. He's a doctor too. He's the head of lung cancer surgery at Duke, Tom D'Amico, is also a very good athlete. We had a blast. I mean, it was like the three amigos, and we're still very, very close. And I'm very proud of them. And I told you a story right before that I'll say now is, I love to be at a party, as a TV guy, with these two brilliant surgeons, and put my arm around them and tell people, thank goodness one of us is giving back to society every day as a TV programmer, right? But I'm very proud of what both of those guys have accomplished.
Thank you. Listen, there's still a couple of more questions coming in. So one of them is, did you have any difficulty in your daily life following this extremely traumatic experience?
That's a great question. And the honest answer is not really. I certainly had, for a while, just naturally, I think, dreams, or what some might refer to as nightmares, depending on your perspective. And once was just sort of where all of a sudden water, and we've all had that, water's rising very quickly. So that probably was reminiscent of being in the back of the plane. But I did have a funny moment, which you'll probably like, which is I had one dream where I was on a flight and we were full, and all of a sudden something happened to the plane, and it appeared that we were, going to go down, and everybody was panicking all over the plane. Now, this is in my dream, but I remember standing up in the back and going, whoa, whoa, listen, I've been there, done that. We're going to be just fine. Now, that was a dream, but that's not bad if that's the worst thing that's kind of happened post-crash.
Well, it sort of leads to one of the questions that's just come up, which is, it's such an inspiring story. And many of the people listening today are either caregivers or they're supporters of people who have survived. Is there a message in what you just said? Is there a message to them that you can give for the caregivers of survivors of cancer?
Well, I just, I've given talks all over the world. And again, you got to remember, I spoke to you guys 3 years ago. So when Peg and Patty sort of called me and said, would you be willing to do it again? First reaction is, well, I'm not sure. I've already done that. But I love so much, again, maybe having roomed with doctors. I love what you guys do so much. And the health caregivers and the people, the doctors, the nurses, people doing every little job to help someone's life get better, to feel better. And sometimes it doesn't work. And I've talked to you obviously deal with that, and that's got to be the hardest part of your world. But you do everything you can to make that patient's life better and their family. And even when it doesn't work out the way that we all hope it does, you've given hope and you've given love. And so to me, it's been so acute over this past year with the COVID-19 situation. Look at what all of you do, and you're willing to cross that line. One of the most heart-rending things to me that I just love is throughout the country, when doctors and nurses would leave work and people would just applaud. I love that, and that's the way it should be. The risk that everyone takes. So I just hope my message for the healthcare workers is you make a huge difference, and you inspire, and you really offer love to not only the patients, but to their families. So I can only represent myself, but I think I speak for everyone in saying thank you from the bottom of our heart.
So I'm going to relay one of the comments that came across just now, which is a comment from one of our audience members and I echo this sentiment. Your survivor story makes me forget mine. I love your expression, and this is the memorable expression. Impossible is just an opinion. What a great line. What a great line, Bill.
Well, you have a lot of great lines, I know, but you can use it. And because you actually do that every day. I'll share one little story that was, so Zoom is such a wonderful sort of invention, over this past year, one of the silver linings that we can all now communicate more easily and virtually. I do miss being there with you guys in person, I have to say, because I loved it 3 years ago when I was able to stand up. But one reason I really loved it was at the end of my talk, a woman came up to me and she had tears in her eyes and she had, a covering over her hair, but she looked at me and she held my hand and she said, your talk has meant so much to me, because she said, today was my last day of chemotherapy. And I go, you've made my day. But what was really incredible, she said, Billy, guess what my former job was? And I had no idea. And I said, I don't know, tell me. And she said, I was a flight attendant. So it was really a sweet moment. And so, if I'm able to, if my story, the reason I tell the story, Dr. Zinner, is because I if it can help anybody feel better, then that's a good day for me.
Great. So one of our guests asked, you've gone through such a harrowing experience. Is there anything today that scares you, that frightens you going forward?
Of course, I think we're all human. I'll share a story. I was down in Miami 4 weeks ago. I had not been back in 10 months. I'd been in South Carolina at my home here. I thought I'd be here 3 weeks, and COVID prevented me from going back. I got down there. I'd taken care of myself. I was masking all the time, socially distant, and a buddy had me come over to the house and to his house to watch a football game. And I just kept my mask on, and it was 4 guys in there watching. We stayed distant. They had never tested positive. And the only time I took my mask off was they said, you got to try this apple tart, which is the best that you've ever had. And so all of us ate this. And for 5 minutes, I took my mask off. And 4 days later, I tested positive. And what scared me, because I really don't get scared very much, and that's part of the faith thing. But what did scare me, which probably all of us can relate to, and you've probably studied this so much, as has Mehmet, I talk to him all the time, is COVID is such an unknown that all of a sudden I was like, I can't believe this. How did this happen? And I was lucky compared to most, but I did feel badly for 7 days. I had a fever spike up to 101. And then incredible fatigue. You've heard it and seen it, hard to explain. But I think the scary part for me was not knowing day to day. Like when you've had the flu, you kind of know what the progression is. But with COVID, I had no idea, what's the next day? Is my breathing going to be hard? I want to give a shout out to Regeneron, because I did have the infusion, and I think it made a huge difference to me. And the 3 friends had the same thing. So again, going back to a point in early in the talk of what you're doing and your colleagues is look at the advancements. I mean, the Regeneron antibody treatment wasn't even there a year ago, and all of this, the incredible research that's been done. So I guess for me, that scared me a little bit, because we're all a little bit fearful of the unknown. After 7 days, I was fine and I was okay. And I think the medicine helped me. But other than that, I think, again, everybody has their own personal faith, but I think if you do have faith in a higher being, then you know what, we'll be looked after. And I think that then just lead your life as fully as you can every day.
Well, certainly faith plays a role in that. And your description of what's going on now in COVID is absolutely correct. We've not in our lifetimes, we've never experienced as many unknowns in a new disease as we're experiencing now. And it's still changing. I mean, the science is changing every day, and faith in that is a very important part. There are a couple of more questions now. So one asked, I'm sure you saw the movie about Sullenberger. What did you think of that movie, and did it actually portray what you experienced?
I was hoping you were not going to ask that question, but since you did. So this is a tricky one. I'm a television guy. I grew up in Hollywood. I've spent a bulk of my years out there. So here's what I love about the movie, is that it celebrates someone that saved my life, and someone who dedicated his life to being the best he could possibly be. And when called upon, he delivered calmly, coolly, and professionally. And that saved 155 people. What I didn't like about the movie was, and this is just creative choice, because I think Clint Eastwood is a fantastic director. I just think on this one, he made choices that I wouldn't have made. That whole dynamic where they put Sullenberger against the NTSB was all baloney. I was in that hearing. They chose one passenger and the pilot, and he and I sat next to each other for the congressional hearing. It was never like that. They asked the questions they should ask as professionals, and they have to have a hearing after every public accident. But that part, and then I would have told, this is just Billy, I would have told the story more from what's going on in the cockpit to also balance it, mirror it, what's going on in the back of the plane. And that to me is why my story, I think, resonates with people, is because I've tried to put you in seat 25A. And so to me, the movie missed on that. But in the end, I told Sullenberger, and he kind of agreed with me when we talked at the 10-year reunion. But he wasn't going to bite the hand that fed him. But he did say, yeah, I probably would have told it a little bit differently. But in the end, it celebrated him. It's named after him, and he saved my life. So I'm okay with it.
Well, almost a logical next question then is, have you, just based on what I've heard today, have you thought about writing your own book, your own story about what happened that incorporates not just the front of the plane, but the back of the plane and your faith?
No, but maybe you're giving me a good idea. I mean, I've certainly, there were people that approached, after and say, would you like to tell a story? And there've been books about things in a little chapter, I think in one survivor story book, but that they asked me questions, but no, I really haven't. Maybe if I slow down at some point, maybe I think I need to add a few more chapters. And as I get to spend some time with you, we get to have lunch one day and share some stories from Boston and your work. Maybe I'll have a fuller book to write. Well,
Billy, it's been a wonderful experience spending time with you, listening to your story. We're gonna have to close soon, but I want to add a couple of comments from the people who have been part of this audience. People who said, not only Sully and the crew were heroes on the flight, passengers like you who took time, others to help before exiting the plane and saving your life, and say a lot about you. God bless you. Thank you, Billy, for sharing your story with us. It's been extremely inspiring.
Well,
I echo the same comments.
Well, that just makes you, that's why you give the talk, honestly, is because that you bond with someone, and maybe I got to share an experience that was harrowing, that will help them at some point. But I really want to, if we're ending now, I just want to thank you for all that you're doing. It really is. It sounds trite sometimes, but because people overuse the word miraculous. But you don't get to brag on you. I'll brag on you a little bit. So you've spent so much of your career in Boston at the Dana-Farber Institute, and we knew about that at Harvard because of the Jimmy Fund that people can read about, which is really remarkable in terms of the amount of money that's been raised for cancer research. But you came down, you left that world, which was unbelievably exciting, to come home to create a new home. And so to me, Peg was a wonderful emissary for you on that plane, and to invite me just out of the blue to come make a talk at a place that didn't even exist yet. I think we had to wait a year for it to open. But then when I came there, I just would say the highest praise I could give you is, if I had something wrong, or if I knew someone had something wrong, I would say, go to the Miami Cancer Institute. They're incredible people, and they will take great care of you.
Well, Billy, you're a true inspiration. And for me, and I'm just going to end this here with, it's been an honor and a privilege for me to return home where I was born and grew up to help start an organization like this, but also to have people like you share such inspirational stories. You can make a difference. You have made a difference. I want to thank you, and I want to thank you for joining us today. And I'm going to welcome you back again. This is the story I want to hear over and over again. You're just an inspirational individual, a remarkable person to be with, and thank you. So,
well, it's a pleasure, and I would end with thanking you and your whole team. And the message I would say, because you hit on it right there, is guess what? All of us can make a difference. And so never forget that whether you're a patient, you're a doctor, you're a nurse or healthcare giver, you make a difference to everybody that you reach out and touch. So thanks. And I look forward to getting to see you in person, and best wishes to the Miami Cancer Institute. It's a beacon.
Thank you, Billy. And with that, we're going to sign off. I want to thank all of us for all of you in the audience for joining us for these inspiring you presentations. Miami Cancer Institute is here for you and the community, and we hope to be able to continue to help our community and change the course of cancer care in South Florida. thank you all for allowing us into your living rooms. Good day.